You know, most people who come to Wallace these days are here to play golf, to enjoy the beaches on the Northumberland Strait, or to visit a cottage. But behind the Wallace and Area Museum, there is a trail that heads from the shore inland and across the history of this area. Now, golf may be what this area is known for today, but at one time, this was better known for the many industries here. And so on today's Walkabout, I'm taking a walk through time in Wallace. There are some stories around that Wallace was named by early Scottish settlers for Sir William Wallace, who was a national hero in Scotland. He, of course, was the leader in the First Scottish War of Independence. He has near legendary status in Scotland, including being the subject of a 15th century epic poem called The Wallace, and of course being one of the key figures in the movie Braveheart. As fanciful an idea this is, it's simply not true. The many communities surrounding the Wallace River, which I'll reach at the end of today's hike, are actually named for the Honourable Michael Wallace. Now, Michael Wallace was from Scotland, arriving in Nova Scotia from Glasgow. In 1785, he was elected to the Nova Scotia House of Assembly representing Halifax. Over the years, he served as a magistrate and became responsible for Halifax's streets and also Sable Island's life-saving station. In 1820, Wallace was named the King Surveyor of Woods, and it was coincidentally during this time in charge of mapping and surveying that the name Wallace stuck in this area. And you ended up in this area with not only Wallace itself, but Wallace River, Wallace Bridge, Wallace Bay, and many more. In Dartmouth, there is even a school named for him, where he was president of the Shubenacadie Canal Company. Michael Wallace died in 1831. Of course, the Mi'kmaq were the first people on this land, and they were followed by the Acadians in the 1700s. And the Acadians were responsible for diking much of the marshland at the end of Wallace Bay, which created farmland. There are rumors that when the Acadians were expelled from Nova Scotia, that they buried their gold along the shoreline. That seems unlikely. There's probably no gold to be found. But when they left, this was one of the places that they actually never returned to. And in their place came the United Empire Loyalists. Following the forced departure of the Acadians from Nova Scotia, land was surveyed to prepare for the arrival of the Loyalists. 137 Loyalists arrived in the area, and they were presented with one plow and a cow to share between two families, one hammer, one saw, and 4 panes of glass for every 4 families. And finally, every 5 families were given a single musket, gunpowder, and some lead for making shells. They had been promised much more, including supplies of butter, flour, and meat. This was certainly not the welcome they expected. Time moved on. Some people moved away, and some people stayed. And those who stayed, well, they were part of industries that developed in the Wallace area. And with access to ample timber from the Wentworth Mountains, which you could access via the river, shipbuilding was a natural endeavor. The first commercial ship to have been recorded to be built here was in the 1700s. And boy, did they ever use the forests. They used elm for rope, they used other bark for the rigging, and they used a stone for an anchor. They then took the ship to Halifax, where it was properly provisioned. It would be a few more years before a significant ship project was recorded here. Samuel Cunard of Cunard Lines fame had the Country's Dalhousie built here. It was a plantation-style ship with 1 deck and 2 masts. It was then that shipbuilding slowly began to ramp up. People were arriving from Scotland with shipbuilding skills and started to take on the trade here. This has been a bit of a wet summer, and this is very pretty, but it's also very wet in this section. But that's part of hiking. So they say when you go hiking, you should be prepared for anything, and that is no truer than it is here today. The rains that we've had this summer have certainly made the trail wet in places, and now I'm in a section that I'm told is actually blowdown from Hurricane Fiona, and so it's a bit tricky making my way through this portion of the trail, but that's hiking. Timber like what I just came through was certainly abundant here in the 1800s, and that combined with the skilled labor proved that you could build ships in Wallace Bay. The arrival of the Crimean War in the 1850s meant that ships were in demand, particularly supply ships for armies. And at its height, there were 11 shipyards churning out ships just down on the waterfront, employing hundreds of people, along with many more cutting timber in the forest. Combined with ships to transport ice to Boston and New York, and ships to transport blueberries, eggs, timber, and other cargo, the demand was high. In 1854 alone, 16 ships were completed or under construction in the shipyards remaining in the area. But as quickly as shipbuilding grew, it came to an end. So the end of the Crimean War considerably reduced the demand for wooden ships, but there was something else. The world was actually shifting to iron-hulled steamships. Well, that was the end of shipbuilding in Wallace, but during its time, it's recorded that there were 110 wooden ships built in Wallace Bay, and probably many more beyond that. But with the end of one industry came another. And it's one that still exists today: sandstone quarrying. I've reached the end of the museum portion of this trail, and I'm gonna say with the Hurricane Fiona blowdown, this trail is much more difficult than you might otherwise be led to believe, because without that blowdown, it's supposed to be an easy trail. Nonetheless, I have made it to the Trans-Canada Trail, where I will continue my hike and talk a lot more about Wallace history. That's after the break. Well, I'm in Wallace Station in Nova Scotia's Cumberland County. Well, before the break, I hiked about 3 kilometers on the museum trail from Wallace itself. And I reached this spot, which is the Trans-Canada Trail. It's an old railway line, and I'm on my way to Kerr's Mill. This portion of the Trans-Canada Trail runs from Pictou to Oxford and on to New Brunswick. Headed towards Pictou behind me, you can also turn off at Denmark and head towards the Gully Trail system and on to Halifax and the South Shore. This is called the Great Trail for a reason. The geology of this area is excellent for the development of sandstone. Millions of years of the sands of the area being compressed into sedimentary rock. The first sandstone was quarried in this area in 1863 by William McNabb. Over time, a company got involved and sandstone was being shipped down to the US East Coast and across Canada. A small railway which operated by gravity was built to the wharf for loading the schooners arriving constantly to haul away the stone. Well, those sandstone quarries started by William McNabb are actually still in operation today. That sandstone can be found all over the place. The Parliament buildings of Canada, the legislature in downtown Halifax. It's even found in some new buildings like the RCMP's new headquarters in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Of course, walking along an old railway line means that you're going to pass lots of communities who are named after the railway. I'm in Wallace Station right now, and I'm headed to somewhere called Wallace Bridge Station, both of course named for railway stations, and the latter being named also because there was a railway bridge there. Now, if you have a railway coming through town, especially in the 1800s, that means your community's going to be pretty hopping. Wallace Station was established in 1887 when the Great American and European Shortline Railway built the Oxford and New Glasgow Railway on the North Shore, connecting the Intercolonial Railway in Oxford to Pictou by a shortline service. In 1890, once it was operational, the Intercolonial Railway took over the line itself, and eventually it was absorbed by CN and called the Oxford Subdivision. Looking at Wallace Station from above today, it is mostly a group of farms bisected by a rural highway, a road to Malagash, and of course, this old rail route. Farming includes all sorts of different pursuits from animals to crops, but at one time, 3 passenger trains a day stopped here, in addition to freight trains. There was a large lumber yard, and there was even a second 3-mile spur line that ran from here down to a sandstone quarry and shipping pier in nearby Wallace proper. Wallace Station had a post office and a one-room schoolhouse. That one-room schoolhouse at one time had 60 children between grades 1 and grade 11, and a single teacher for them all. There was a stove in the middle of the classroom that always kept people either too warm or too cold. And water, well, that came from a bucket and a ladle that they all shared. The water was fetched from a nearby home. Eventually, the school shut down and it became the Orangeman's Hall. And then that closed, and in 1997, the old one-room schoolhouse was moved. But it still exists. These days, it's a workshop. You know, I'm not going to cross a notable border of any kind, but I am around this point entering the community of Kerr's Mill. Now, Kerr's Mill, by all accounts, was a very successful business. The 1871 Wallace Business Directory says that C.E. Kerr operated a carding, saw, and grist mill, all in this area, more than likely using power from the Wallace River, which I'm approaching. Kerr was a common name in Nova Scotia in the 1800s. If you first try and search for the records on the mill, you are drawn to Thomas Kerr in Pictou County and his family, who operated numerous mills and even had a connection with Stanfields at one time. But C.E. Kerr, referred to by the mills here, seems to be Charles Edward Kerr, who was born in 1836 and died in 1908, the entire time living in this area. He was officially a customs collector, but going through genealogical records, others in the family by the same name either moved away, died young, or worked aboard ships, all making it impossible for them to own and operate multiple mills. There are not many records of his operations, though a small photo of one of the mills exists in a local museum. Well, this is the Wallace River Swing Bridge, and it's considered quite a sight, and it's a great destination for a hike. It's considered significant because of its architecture and its location in such a remote area. Probably won't be of any surprise, given the quarrying in this area, to learn that the piers are made of sandstone. This railway shortline was originally constructed in response to the ambition of Prime Minister John A. Macdonald for rail lines to run across all of Canada. Looking at the bridge, it may seem like just another railway bridge. But to those who know these things, this one is special. It has 2 separate components, spanning elements and foundations. The span consists of 3 deck plates, all to the west end of the bridge. It then had a truss and a single swinging span. The swinging span doesn't operate anymore, and this is obviously not the original decking. But in its day, this would have been a special piece of engineering. You may be wondering why there is a swinging railway bridge in the middle of rural Nova Scotia. Most certainly there were no galleons sailing up this river for battles, but there were sailing ships. Upriver from here is the Wentworth Valley, and there was a lot of lumbering going on there. There still is today. And of course, that lumber had to get to market. The roads were not very good, if they even existed at the time, and so the lumber was loaded on sailing ships, taken past this railway line into the Northumberland Strait in Wallace Bay. And remember, they were building wooden ships down there too. a lot has changed in 150 years. At one time, multiple trains were thundering along this railway every single day. And there's a change somewhere else near here. Acadians once built dikes to create farmland down in Wallace Bay and to keep the seawater out. Well, today those same dikes are being used, but they're being used to keep the seawater in and to create a marshland to support wildlife. And that's where I'll be after the break. Well, not far from the museum trail, there is a hike which is not that long and I'm told is fairly easy to do. And it's an opportunity to see migratory and resident wildlife during all seasons. Well, I'm not sure if I'm going to see much wildlife today, but whether I do or not, I'm sure it's going to be a beautiful hike. I'm here at the Wallace Bay National Wildlife Area. That's where I'm on my walkabout. This National Wildlife Area is found at the upper end of Wallace Harbour, near the Northumberland Strait, and is over 580 hectares in size. The lands for this area were purchased between 1971 and 1973 by the federal government, and the wildlife area itself was established in 1980. It's a mix of marine and freshwater wetlands, forests, and fields. The freshwater portion is about 250 hectares in size, and the tidal channels and salt marshes comprise about 195 hectares. The remainder is a combination of old fields, forest, and agricultural lands. The Mi'kmaq called this area Remsheg, which literally translates to the place in between, and that actually meant the place in between Pugwash and Tatamagouche and some other areas. This was just a middle spot. The Acadians arrived in the Wallace area sometime around 1710, and they used their knowledge of dikes and marshes to actually reclaim a lot of this area for farmland, and some of that farmland is still on the other side of the bay here. Now, the marshes are once again taking over, and that's on purpose. The parking area off this wilderness area is on a road called Abattoir Road, named because it crosses an abattoir. This was part of one built in 1838, but which has seen many modifications and reconstructions since. It divides the refuge between marine and freshwater portions. An abattoir is a channel for water controlled by a door built into a dike, something you may be familiar with if you visited the Annapolis Valley and have seen the very famous Acadian dikes there. The door prevents salt water from coming into the fields at high tide, but allows excess fresh water to escape to the ocean. This portion of the trail has birch trees lining either side, and they are absolutely full of these small birds of all different species, mostly picking the seeds off the trees, I guess. Maybe some of the insects as well. It's quite beautiful, and so I've stopped here on the trail for a moment. This trail is a 3.2 kilometer loop, and if you do it counterclockwise, as I have, what happens is you start on the marsh for about 1.7 kilometers or so, and then you finish on a woodland trail. You do need to check at certain times of the year. Parts of the trail can be impassable, high tides, flooding, rain, so forth. And in fact, today, the woodland trail is flooded in one part. So I'm only going to do the marsh trail, at 1.7 kilometers. But to me, that's actually the most beautiful part because you get to take in both the wetlands as well as these small little forested areas, and you see and hear quite a wide variety of wildlife. National wildlife areas have the primary purpose, as you might imagine, of protecting and conserving wildlife and their habitat. The Federal Department of Environment and Climate Change has established trails and infrastructure here so the public can observe plants and animals. But it's a little different from a national park, where there are usually staff and regular maintenance of trail systems. A wide variety of activities are permitted in national wildlife areas. Of course, hiking and wildlife viewing, I think that probably goes without saying. But hunting, trapping, and even sport fishing are all permitted here. And that's important to be aware of, especially during waterfowl season, because you want to be aware that there are hunters in the area. The other thing you want to watch for are traps, because along the shore there may be leg hold traps, because muskrat trapping is very popular, especially in this area. One of the other things that's allowed that is absolutely frowned upon in national parks is you are allowed, non-commercially of course, to harvest edible plants and mushrooms. Much of this area was wetland created with the support of Ducks Unlimited. Some of this area was once drained and covered in farmers' fields, but has been reclaimed. The result of this work has been a dramatic increase in the waterfowl seen here. There are 8 species regularly seen here, including the green-wheeled teal, the American black duck, hooded merganser, and northern shoveler. The wetlands provide important breeding habitat for a range of birds, including the American coot, Wilson snipe, and American bittern. Occasionally, marsh wrens, ospreys, and Virginia rail also breed here. Those are just some of the examples of commonly or occasionally seen species here, but in fact, over 155 species of bird and 24 different mammal species have been recorded in the refuge since its creation. Flying around just above my head are some red-winged blackbirds, and again, more of the species that you find just walking this short bit of trail. This area is home to a number of threatened species, including short-eared owls, chimney swifts, and barn swallows. In the fall, the endangered peregrine falcon can be found here quite commonly. This wildlife area is made up of about 75% wetland, 7.5% or so abandoned and active farmland, and the remainder is forested area. I'm coming pretty close to the end of the portion of the trail that is on the wetland. This is a truly special spot, and one that's important to protect, not only for our enjoyment to take in the splendor here, but also for the many migratory birds that use this place, and of course the other animals that call this home. John Muir once said that every walk in nature, one receives far more than he seeks. And I think that's what we all hope for on our walkabout.
Hey, come on, feel the sunshine.